Hi everyone, it's Tammy from the Historical Association of Annapolis Royal.
And I'm Alan Melanson from the Explorer Guide.
We're standing here in front of the Annapolis Royal Lighthouse, which was purchased back in 2004.
Correct.
And under the stewardship of Darlene Melanson, she's our president of the Historical Association of Annapolis Royal. Here to film another episode in our Haunting Tales from Annapolis Royal series. And Alan, which one is this one going to be called?
Tonight, folks, we're going to tell the tale of the ghost of the Sir Fenwick Williams of Carr's house, which is where the present-day Royal Bank of Canada stands on St. George Street. So join us, and we'll tell you another haunting tale. One of the ghosts lived in this, but this was part of a house. There were three, this house, Doreen Lewis's house, and the house, the fellow who fixed the lawnmowers and everything, those three, part of those houses were ripped up when they built the Royal Bank building. And that's where Sir Fenwick Williams of Carr's lived, but then they brought him and added to those parts when they brought him to these areas. But this is part of the Williams house, so it was Doreen Lewis's house, and so was that house was part, and this house, this was where Richie used to live here. Tonight, folks, I'm going to tell you the story of the ghosts from the Sir Fenwick Williams of Carr's house, which stood where the Royal Bank of Canada stands today in Annapolis Royal. I'm taking this one from the book, The Romance of Old Annapolis Royal. That was written by Charlotte Isabel Perkins. They called her Lottie. She lived at the Hillsdale house. At the time, her father owned the property. And this is the first book that the Historical Association of Annapolis Royal ever published. From her book comes the tale of a ghost that spanned many generations. I might have to get the print is small in this, so I may have to put my reading glass on in front of me here so I can see properly, get a good eye on it. It starts. The story about this house is as follows. When Miss Tobias and Miss Leslie, young ladies of the town, used to go riding in the morning, they were not allowed to go unaccompanied. So a young man, George Ince, afterwards Colonel Ince, made an appointment to go with them, which he did not fulfill. The following evening, he went to see these young ladies, and they chaffed them about having overslept. No, he said, if you had seen what I saw last night, you would have not felt like getting up this morning either. Full of curiosity, they asked, why, George? What did you see? Then he related how he was asleep in the east bedroom of the Williams house, when, in the middle of the night, he awoke startled to see a soldier glide into the room, approach his bed, and hold up the stump of a bleeding arm. The figure then disappeared. A period of 30 to 40 years were to pass, and then it is told how Miss Tobias, now Mrs. T.S. Whitman, went to set up with Mrs. Daly, who lived at the Hillsdale house and was not expected to live very long. They talked about the supernatural, and Mrs. Daly asked Mrs. Whitman, do you believe in ghosts? Mrs. Whitman said no, but Mrs. Daly added, I do. Some years ago, we lived in the old Williams house, and then recounted an experience exactly the same as the old story told by George Ince. Mrs. Whitman recalled the coincidences of her girlhood days. Other visitors to the Williams house, occupying the east room downstairs, have seen the figure of this soldier. He was described as being tall and splendid physique, wearing the uniform of the Royal Engineers. The uniform seemed to be torn and defaced, one shoulder strap being missing, and his helmet was thrown back and hung suspended by the chin strap over his right shoulder. The clank of his spurs sounded on the floor as he approached the bed. As he drew near, the paralyzed watcher, his face was seen to be deathly, eyes bulging, his face drawn in intense pain. He seemed to be searching for someone, and in his left hand carried an unsheathed cavalry sword. Then he raised his bleeding arm, severed at the wrist. There is a sequel. When digging the cellar for the Union, now Royal Bank, a skeleton was found in the drain box. A lady, looking out of her window at the time, saw a man lift a plank and then run as if for his life. A crowd gathered, and Mr. Jack Ritchie, the first to arrive, exclaimed, "My God, it is John Kennedy." It seems that John Kennedy of Granville had disappeared, and the only trace found of him was his hat, pierced by 2 bullets, floating upriver. But this corpse, as shown by the clothing and brass buttons, was evidently that of a soldier and not Mr. Kennedy. There were those who remembered an army pay officer having mysteriously disappeared, and more than likely, this was his body. The story goes further. For although the body was quickly exhumed, it was noted that the right arm was cut off above the wrist. A young lady carried off the skull. The boots, sharp-pointed ones, were in Judge Cowling's office for years. However, it was Mr. Gray who, seeing the excitement, went over to his store and from his collection of curios, returned with those pointed shoes, which he dropped at the man's feet unobserved. The ruse never leaked out. The laying of the ghost was an old saying, which inferred that if the remains concerned were discovered, the ghost appeared no more. However, the tenants of the Williams house, for long afterwards, claimed a queer feeling persisted in the house. You see, folks, the Williams house that is here, it was cut into 3 different sections, and it was brought in various pieces of our town. And the 3rd house that I know as the Ritchie house, it is 37 St. James Street. There's 1 street here behind the Royal Bank. So if folks live in those properties or visit, you might feel something strange and eerie. And if you ever go in the Royal Bank and you feel a presence, it may well be the presence of the ghost of the Sir Fenwick Williams of Carr's house. Al Melanson, Explorer Guide. Bye-bye.
There are about 135 registered heritage properties in the town of Annapolis Royal. The placking of registered heritage properties is a program of the Historical Association of Annapolis Royal.
Greenhouse. It was all white back then, but they have done a fair bit of work on it, and now it's actually, you wouldn't think it's a house that was built in the late 1700s.